What's going on, guys? My name is Zach. Welcome to the Phoenix 787 channel. I'm here with Glen Wood at Ginza Studio here. Glenn, good to see you again, sir.
Thank you, Zach. It's good to be here.
Glenn is a very important person, and he is doing a very important thing. October 9th at the Tokyo District Court. He is fighting for his human rights, and I'm here today to interview him and discuss the case, how it's been going so far, and discuss why this is important for everybody. So, Glenn, thank you very much for coming today.
Great to be here, Zach, and thanks for highlighting what, as you mentioned, I think is a very, very important case. Not really about me, but about everybody, and about human rights and about contracts.
Yes. And if you don't know much about this case, he'll give you a brief background, and then I'm going to ask him four what I consider the most important questions for this case and why this is an important situation for the entire, not just Japan, but for the entire world, because it really sets a precedent what's going on here. So if you can give me a brief background as to what this case is and your story, if you haven't heard of Glenn's story yet.
Thanks very much, Zach. Well, in a nutshell, in 2015, my son was born. He was in an emergency room. It was life or death. We weren't sure if he was going to make it or not. And I had applied for paternity leave, which was rejected time and time again, which, as you know, is a legal right in Japan.
Yes.
And at the end of the day, I just had to go. And eventually, I was harassed and fired from my job.
That ain't good, is it?
Well, no, it sets a precedent which basically permits harassment. And I think the main point that we're standing up for here is that harassment is never an acceptable form of management.
Right, and that's the point of your case, basically, is one of the main points is it's not just to get your job back, it's to say, hey, this isn't an acceptable thing to do.
Well, that's right, so if a young lady is sexually harassed in the company and she puts up her hand, basically the company says, oh, you're lying, and has the right to then harass her and fire her.
Yeah.
And so we're just saying that that's not acceptable.
Right.
That people have a right to have children and continue their careers. People have a right to, for example, if you have a medical emergency, if someone in your family has a medical emergency, you have a right to go to the hospital and then continue your career.
Yeah, should be obvious, right? But in this situation, it's definitely not obvious. So you worked with Morgan Stanley, and they got bought out by Mitsubishi, and it formed MUFJ Mitsubishi Holding. Is that right? What was it called? There was two different things there that was formed after the Lehman shock.
That's right. So Mitsubishi made an investment into Morgan Stanley to save Morgan Stanley after the Lehman shock.
Right.
And so in Japan, we ended up with two corporations. One is called Mitsubishi UFJ Morgan Stanley, which is basically Mitsubishi Securities.
Right.
And the other one is Morgan Stanley Mitsubishi UFJ, which, again, it's very confusing. But both companies are shareholders in both businesses.
Mm-hmm. So you worked for the latter one, the one that was the Japanese company.
The former is Mitsubishi UFJ Morgan Stanley is my company. Yeah.
Mitsubishi UFJ Morgan Stanley. Okay, yeah.
Correct.
So, like you said, it's kind of a confusing setup. So, the whole Lehman shock thing really set things into motion here in Japan, didn't it? So, I'm going to get to the four core questions here. I have them written down, and we already went over these prior. So, if it sounds like it's scripted, I'm sorry, but we wanted to make sure we get these points out, basically, right? So, because of how important this is. The first question, it's the obvious question for me. It's like, what are they trying to prove? What is Mitsubishi trying to prove? What is their end game?
Yeah, it's a great question, Zach, and I think it's quite confusing. At the end of the day, I think they don't want to set a precedent of them just giving in to people who claim they've been harassed. Because I think, from my experience and from my own investigations, there have been many, many people who would be in line. And so I think they're concerned about that. Maybe they're concerned about protecting people internally. At the end of the day, though, as we've discussed, the point here is that harassment is just never an acceptable form of management.
Right.
And to deal with somebody who, a woman who takes maternity leave, or a man who takes paternity leave, or someone who has an emergency and needs to go to the hospital and take care of their family, to deal with those people then by harassing them and firing them is something which really impinges on universal human rights. And I think that's what we're talking about here today.
So they're not really willing to change and modernize, basically, it seems, even though it is a human right to be a parent.
That's kind of what it comes down to, and you think in Japan, where we have no children being born, we have a big problem with demographics and people not being able to have children.
Massive population problem.
Well, exactly, right? So you can imagine, if both the mother and the father in modern Japanese society have to work, and they realize that if either the mother or the father were to take maternity or paternity leave, that they would be harassed and fired. Well, then the choice is obvious. You have to either delay having children or not have children at all, and that's kind of where we are today.
Yeah. It's a bad situation. You'd think Japan Inc. would say, hey, we need to actually modernize and do this. And there are some cases that we'll probably get to later in this video that companies have shown interest in modernizing and changing their policies and stuff. But in a lot of cases, it's just really backwards, isn't it?
That's the way it would seem, and I love Japan. I've been in Japan for 30 years now, and this is kind of my home.
30 years, geez, yeah.
And so I was very hesitant to stand up and say anything, but at the end of the day, after 30 years of kind of seeing the good and the bad, this is an area where I really think, especially when the whole world is watching Japan, going into the Olympics and so on and so forth, this is an area where Japan can really make an improvement, really make a difference. The workplace in Japan, it's time for the workplace in Japan to be modernized. We need modern management practices.
It's notorious as being just like you literally work yourself to death.
Well, exactly. We've got sky-high suicide rates, and we've got death by overwork. Is the famous Japanese karoshi, which again is something which is just unacceptable, it really goes against human rights. It's ironic, Zach. You mentioned the company and what they're thinking. Well, the president of my company, Mitsubishi UFJ Morgan Stanley, actually came out to the media and announced that they have a tremendous harassment problem internally at the company.
Wow.
And even when he said that, he said there was also a problem in the equities division, which was my division. And yet at the same time, they've gone on to settle with some other cases, but at the same time, they continue to fight my case, which again is very puzzling.
It is puzzling. It's just really strange. So what does Morgan Stanley think? Because Morgan Stanley it's a global company. It's very much an internationalized company. Have they reached out to you about it? Have they talked to you about it? Or has any of the executives here in Japan for Morgan Stanley, have they come to you about it?
It's a great question too, and unfortunately they haven't. And as you mentioned, it's a global company that has very different standards perhaps than Mitsubishi.
Yeah.
And so I approached them a couple of times, and basically the response was that they don't want to talk about it because it's an ongoing court process. But that's again, for a global company, that seems a rather strange way to deal with.
You'd think they want to say something, right? I don't understand why they're not saying anything for or against. If they outright said, "Oh, we're going to protect our managers or protect our employees," you'd understand them better, for better or worse. But in this case, it's just puzzling, isn't it?
Well, yeah, you would think that someone would have the guts to kind of stand up and say, we want our employees to be able to have children and continue their careers.
Yeah.
And we're going to deal with this in a way that benefits everybody. It's really an opportunity, I think, for companies like Mitsubishi and Morgan Stanley to make a statement and to make it a really win-win type of solution.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's no bad blood between you and Morgan Stanley. You want them to be successful, right?
I love my job, and I love Mitsubishi and Morgan Stanley. I think they're great companies. At the end of the day, though, they've admitted they have a harassment problem, and I was a first-hand witness of that, obviously, and a victim of that, as were some other people on my team. And so let's come to why don't we solve the problem?
Yeah, right. Should be obvious.
I would think so.
My third question is, have any major Japanese firms or even foreign firms or companies, have they reached out to you about this case?
In fact, they have. Many companies have, and a couple of large corporations in particular have spoken about me coming in and helping them do an assessment of their risk towards harassment.
Oh, wow.
Which I think is a great step forward.
Yeah,
if corporations were to hire third parties to come in and assess the degree of risk they're facing vis-a-vis harassment, I think that would be a big step forward. And it's great that companies are realizing that harassment is a risk. And that it's not only a legal risk, it's a risk in terms of being able to hire people, it's a risk in terms of ESG investing, it's a risk in terms of being a viable, value-adding corporation in society today.
Right. Let me just, before I go to the fourth question, you just mentioned ESG investing. We talked a little bit about it the other day when we were preparing for this video. I didn't know what that was. You wrote down some notes here related to ESG investing. Would you mind talking about that real fast?
Not at all, yeah. We've started an ESG fund. E is for environmental policy, S is for social policy.
Environmental, social.
And G is for corporate governance.
Governance.
And so it's basically investors who are looking at corporations over the long term. And at the end of the day, corporations in capitalism have a responsibility to add value to society.
Right.
In other words, corporations that detract and add negative value to society aren't long-term sustainable.
Right.
So the point of ESG investing is to look at companies that are of course profitable, but that are also adding value to society. And it's like a correction mechanism really for capitalism.
That makes sense.
So companies, for example, that if you have a manager that comes in and fires all the pregnant women in a corporation, that's going to maybe help their profitability for 1 quarter or 2 quarters, but over the long run, it's actually going to make the company impossible to run. People aren't going to want to join the company. Employees are going to be dissatisfied. It's going to lower productivity. And so the idea of ESG investing is to look at companies that are doing both. They're adding value to society. They aren't destroying the economy. That aren't destroying the environment. That aren't destroying families, and that have transparent corporate governance, and at the same time are profitable.
Right. That sounds great. I think it's something that a lot of people need to analyze when they hire managers too, is their ability to do this ESG thing, correct?
Well, sure. When you're hiring people, you're hiring managers, you obviously don't want people that are going to harass your employees and are going to increase your risk towards harassment. At the end of the day, again, the main point here that we mentioned at the beginning is that harassment is never, ever an acceptable form of management.
It is not, yeah. It should be obvious, right? But in a lot of situations here in Japan, they kind of ignore the obvious.
Unfortunately, I think it's an area really where the workplace in Japan needs to change.
Yeah.
And we often see even bullying amongst children. And the number of suicides we see amongst children due to bullying is horrendous. You hear about it in the news
all the time. But there's this Japanese saying, it's like the nail that sticks up gets hammered down, right?
Well, that's right, and that's part of how Japanese society has been built. After being in Japan for so long and seeing something which I think is so obvious, I put myself in a position where I'm, I guess, the nail that's sticking up.
Yeah, but the thing is, if it's like a nail made of diamond, it's kind of hard to hammer a diamond nail, right?
Thank you, Zach. It's been really encouraging to see the videos that I've made be viral in terms of being seen by millions of people now. And literally, I've gotten thousands of responses from Japanese people, to the extent that I can't even respond to them all. People saying, that happened to me, don't stop, please don't stop. Yeah. This is really important for Japan. It's important for society. It's important even for the global community, I think. That, again, it's a universal human right for people to be able to have children and continue their career.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel lucky to be able to do this with you, man, because of the impact that you've had. The amount of news sources that have covered his case, both in Japan, Japanese language and English language media, global media, all that. It's been a huge deal, and it's really, with Japan hosting the Rugby World Cup this year, and hosting the Olympics next year, it's really putting a huge spotlight on Japan, and I'm pretty sure Japan's not gonna like what's going on right now with this case, because they're really slow to make changes, but if they implement the changes, the long-term benefits are gonna be very much seen.
It's a win-win, Zach, to address these issues. I love Japan, and when the whole world is watching, as you mentioned now for the World Cup and then next year for the Olympics, I want to make sure that the world sees the Japan that I love. Yeah. And not these harassment issues and issues of universal human rights being abused. That's not the Japan that I know and love. Let's make sure that the world sees a Japan which is changing, and a Japan that's willing to embrace areas like this and make a difference and stand up and say, we're not going to allow harassment in the workplace anymore. We're going to have protection programs for whistleblowers. Yes. When harassment issues do come up, for example, we're going to have third-party investigations, not these kind of internal bogus investigations. Internal investigations in Japan are just absolutely... They don't do anything. Well, at the end of the day, they're there to protect the corporation, and they're there to protect the perpetrators. And in fact, that's part of what we're saying here is if a young woman steps up and says she's been sexually harassed, she deserves to be listened to, and there deserves to be a third-party investigation, and she deserves to be protected instead of fired. Yeah. Finally, the fourth question I want to ask, you covered it a little bit already, but
ultimately, out of this court case, what are you looking to accomplish?
So there's a few things that we've already done. We've got a book that's ready to be published in English and in Japanese, and I think that will really move the needle forward and raise awareness globally to this issue. We've also been approached by a large streaming media company to do a documentary.
Oh, wow.
Which I also think would be very powerful in terms of being an agent of change. We've already talked about the ESG fund.
Yes.
I think ESG is a great correction mechanism for capitalism. It punishes corporations that are doing the wrong thing, and it lowers cost of equity for corporations that are doing the right thing. So I think that is also moving in the right direction.
Yeah.
We started an online petition. If you haven't already, please go and take a look at it. We're asking for zero tolerance policy for workplace harassment in Japan.
That's going to be the first link in the description. You guys don't even have to click the read more thing. It's the very top link. That's going to be the petition.
Thanks very much, Zach.
So please sign that.
It's
petition.
great to see. We've got almost 6,000 people now that have signed the petition, which is it really brings tears to my eyes to see that people are looking at this, that are focused on this, that understand what we're saying, that harassment is just never an acceptable form of management. People do not have the right to harass other people.
Right. Absolutely. One of the things, though, out of this case that we've mentioned a couple times when we were talking about it, when it comes to Japanese management, I see this a lot too. Like I've seen it with people discussing how they've had harassment issues at work. You see it on dramas, on TV and stuff too. The Japanese word "hairyō," right?
Right.
It's a word it's called in consideration. Now it's a term that's kind of you're given consideration. After you take a paternity leave and you come back, you're given consideration. But it's not really consideration, is it? Could you explain that a little bit, that term?
Yeah, thanks, Zach. Consideration, or hairyō in Japanese, is unfortunately often an excuse used by management to harass people. Just a brief explanation for those watching. If a woman takes maternity leave and comes back, often then her job is taken away from her. She's placed on what's called a mommy track. So she's on a completely different career track, and often then she's harassed and pushed aside, and eventually then fired. The excuse given for that by management is hairyō, or consideration. In other words, we're being considerate to her by taking her job away because we're worried about her as a mother. And so in my case, the same excuse was given in terms of why my job was taken away from me when I came back from paternity leave, is that the managers were concerned about me, and so they wanted to show consideration, and that's why they took my job away and segregated me and then eventually fired me.
Wow.
And I think the point here is if the person in question doesn't want consideration, if the person in question isn't asking for hairyō, or consideration, then that effort given is actually harassment. And I think that's the point that we want to make, and we want to make sure that management understands that. For example, Zach, if you were injured and you came to me as I was your manager, you came back to work, and I said, Zach, I didn't even ask you, right? I said, Zach, I'm really concerned about you because you've been injured. So I want you just to sit there and do nothing for a few weeks, and we'll see how that works out. And I didn't even ask you or anything. That's the type of hairyō that we're talking about. So as a manager, what I would consider hairyō, for example, would be then to sit down with Zach and say, gosh, I'm really sorry about your accident. You must be in a lot of pain, and I'm really grateful that you're into the office today. Is everything okay? Can you attend that meeting that we have set for 8 o'clock tonight?
That's consideration. That's being considerate of others,
Exactly.
Right? Taking someone's job away because they just had a kid, or that's not being considerate at all. In fact, that's be considered rude if you're just assuming someone's unable to have done something because they just became a parent or because they broke their leg or whatever, right?
Exactly.
If you want to be considerate of others, you just, you mind your own business, you let them do their work that they're assigned to do,
Exactly.
and you let them be the person that they want to be. You let them be both a father and a manager. You let them be a mom and a manager, right?
That's right.
You hear Japan's government all the time saying, we need to have more women in power and stuff, but if this sort of thing keeps happening, then they're not going to get in power, are they?
Well, that's right. And in fact, there were no women managers really in my office.
Oh, geez, wow.
And as you said,
imagine my shock. Really.
When someone comes back to work after having an injury or a surgery or having a baby, actually that pain and that experience that they've been through, I would argue, makes them a better manager and makes them a better employee. So let's leverage that and let's let them do their job and add value to the corporation. That's why we hired them in the first place.
My dad mentioned to me when he looks to hire people, if he sees someone who's a parent, he would actually consider them over someone who wouldn't be a parent, because he considers them to be both able to be dedicated to their family and their work. You know, someone who's able to show dedication to one thing easily could be able to show dedication to another thing. They give a lot of consideration for people who just had kids in the States. You know, that's the reason why one of my dad's co-workers, who's also upper level manager, Japan Inc. needs this type of person, right? You know, she's got 4 kids and she's an upper level manager. Like, you don't hear that in Japan at all, because they don't, you know, companies here in Japan just don't give that sort of provision, and they really should.
Yeah, no, unfortunately that's the case.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of viewed as when someone has a child that their responsibility then is to quit their job and stay at home.
Yeah, the gender roles in Japan are just nuts.
And that leads to, I think, this type of situation.
Yeah.
And so when people don't fall into place in the gender roles that are prescribed by the company or by the older men management, then what happens is the older men management enforce those roles on the people. And that's viewed as, quote, consideration, which at the end of the day is an excuse for what is very clearly harassment. It's very clear. And that's why, you know, we've taken this to court. Thankfully, thanks to all the support we've gotten and the many people that have written in, one of my witnesses was allowed. And as I told my supporters in the past, it was shocking to see the court process that none of my witnesses were allowed before this went viral.
Everybody on his side was pretty much silenced. He wasn't allowed to bring in any sort of witness. I saw how clearly stacked against you that you were. I was like, wow, this is a serious situation. And I'm really glad that those videos ran viral as well, and that's what really stirred everything in motion.
Thank you, Zach.
Now, this witness you mentioned to me earlier, this was a person who was originally under a gag order, but what happened here?
That's right. So it was another situation of harassment, and the person in question, who's going to be my witness, took Mitsubishi to court. Then an agreement of some kind was reached, and he's not allowed to speak about what happened unless he's subpoenaed to court. And so in this case, when he is now allowed to come and be my witness, it's fantastic, really. It's a really good step forward. He's going to be there on October 9th. And again, I invite everybody watching this, please,
October 9th.
Come to Tokyo District Court on October 9th. He will be a witness. He'll be able, the gag order will be lifted, and he'll be able to say what happened to him and how it ended up. And I think he was also a witness to what happened to me. So I'm very, very thankful that that's happened, and I think that's great for all of us that he's going to be there on October 9th.
I'll be there too. There's a few things we wanted to mention that we just want to make sure you guys go to for resources on this. And do you have any final words? You mentioned you added some things you wanted to make sure you said, or did you already cover those?
Well, I think we covered things, Zach. At the end of the day, I've mentioned it several times now, but harassment is never an acceptable form of management.
Yes.
We're doing everything we can to get rid of it, to make this case kind of monumental in terms of sending a very strong statement that the age of harassment is coming to an end.
Yes.
That it's not acceptable for corporations to harass employees. At the end of the day, we're going to court on October 9th. Invite everybody to please come and join us there. That will make a big difference. The petition, please sign the petition if you could. We've also got a webpage, patahara.com, which has been started by supporters. So please take a look at these things, and your support will make a huge difference. So I really appreciate you highlighting this.
Absolutely. I'm really glad to have the opportunity to be able to highlight this.
Thank you.
The patahara.com group was started in part by Langley.
But Langley Esquire has been a very strong supporter, and we're very happy to have them.
They have a YouTube channel as well, and I'm pretty sure that they're going to cover this eventually on their channel. So they cover a lot of human rights cases on their channel too.
That's right. Fantastic organization with really good people.
Yeah.
So thank you. Thank you to Langley Esquire.
There's also a Patreon as well for this case. I want to make sure we highlighted that. So that link will be down in the description too.
Thank you very much, Zach. Yeah, Patreon we've set up as a way for people to support victims of harassment. So if you haven't already, please take a look at that link.
Basically, all the proceeds go towards victims and their families from the Patreon page, advising lawyers, direction, and stuff like that. It's not going to anyone else but the people who are working to solve this problem and the victims of harassment in Japan.
That's right.
And gotta make sure we highlight that, because I know a lot of Patreon sometimes can be a little bit sketchy for some people, but in this situation, Patreon is probably one of the best Patreons you can donate to.
it's been great to see both individuals and corporations putting their money where their mouth is and really helping out the victims around harassment, in particular in the workplace in Japan. It's great to see corporations understanding that harassment is a serious issue and that it's something that can be very difficult to get rid of if it's well ingrained in a corporation's corporate culture. And so stepping up in this way to look at third-party type investigations and assessments to getting rid of harassment in the workplace is a great sign. So thank you to those corporations, and thank you again to all the supporters out there that have been supporting this and helping us. We really appreciate it, and we really look forward to seeing you on October 9th.
Yes, so thank you guys so much for watching this video. All the links are going to be down below in the description. You can check out everything that Glen has done up till now, and be there on October 9th if you're able to go here in Tokyo. Come on over and support probably one of the biggest causes that can be supported in the Japanese political sphere of influence, because this is important. It impacts everybody, and this is one of the reasons I wanted to make this video, because it's, even if it's a couple hundred people who view this, or even if it's a couple thousand people who view this, it's just the word's getting out there, and more people are discussing it, more people are talking about it. So yeah, I'm really glad that you came over to the Ginza Studio today and we had this opportunity to talk about your case, and I know you're gonna do good things. I'm pretty sure with everyone's support, it's going to go in the right direction.
Frankly, Zach, with the way things have gone so far, I think we've already won. And this blog and this YouTube video is testament to that, I think. So thank you again for all the supporters. We really appreciate it. Thank you, Zach.
Thank you. All right, well, I'll see you guys in the next video. Look forward to the vlog coming up on Wednesday, and thank you guys very much. See y'all later.
Thank you.